For years, the main backers of Assad have been Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. But over the last week, their support collapsed, all three of them, because all three of them are far weaker today than they were when I took office. Our approach has shifted the balance of power in the Middle East. Through this combination of support for our partners, sanctions, diplomacy, and targeted military force when necessary, we now see new opportunities opening up for the people of Syria and for the entire region.
Wow, that was really wonderful. Apparently, even though it was disaster for the regime of Bashar al-Assad, it's good news for the Syrian people. And we're now going to usher in this new period. Well, at least that's the view from Joe Biden and the current U.S. administration. But there are others, including our guest for today, Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst, who has a somewhat different view. Even before I get into some of the stuff that you've been writing on your sonar21.com, what do you when you heard that for the first time from Biden right after Assad fell, that's taking credit for everything like it was a good thing? What was your reaction?
It was like listening to the captain of the Titanic telling all the passengers, hey, I hope you've enjoyed this trip. It has been a fantastic trip, and we'll chalk this up as a successful ocean voyage. We all know how that turned out. This is going to turn out the same way. Biden's delusional. But what it does do is it does confirm, as we were saying last week, that CIA was involved with this. This is a part of a joint CIA, British, Turkish intelligence operation. This was not some spontaneous uprising of people pursuing democracy. This was an intelligence operation, start to finish.
Now, you have said, in fact, let me just go to that here on your sonar21.com here. You said, like, is it mission accomplished? And one of the things you said right off the top that kind of got my attention was you said, this is not the result primarily of military pressure from the terrorist group HTS. Something else was afoot. A deal was cut, and Assad was persuaded to abandon his government and head for Russia. That's very different than the public narrative that it was just this military onslaught from HTS. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so you remember...
Hey, Larry.
Yes, sir.
You turn your mic down just a tad. It's it's a little bit hot, that's all.
Okay, let's see if I can get the settings here. We'll get that turned down. Come on.
Sorry, just a little bit of administrative paperwork here, folks. We're taking care of. We'll get right back to it.
Let's go with the audio and microphone volume. How's that?
A little bit more.
Is that better?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Larry. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I don't want to blast everybody out.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So about 3 months ago, the Arab League welcomed Syria back in. If you recall, back in 2012, the Arab League had expelled Syria from the League under pressure from the United States. They had the full support of Saudi Arabia. So here's Assad saying, hey, man, I'm back in good graces. And apparently some in the Arab League were saying, you need to distance yourself from both Iran and Russia. And so both Iran and Russia were offering Assad upgrades, training support for the military, and Assad rejected it all. He refused it, turned it down, because I guess he thought, I've got all my new buddies in the Arab League, and they're going to back me up. I'm in good shape. No, that turned out not to be the case. They betrayed him. The other thing that I've learned in the last 24 hours is, and this would be a whole different subject, and we can cover it some other time, but the Chinese have been intercepting all U.S. encryption communications, all, for at least the last 2 years, which means the Chinese had all the intelligence about what the U.S. and the Brits were plotting to do with the Turks in Syria. And that information was passed, I'm certain, to Russia. So, because Russia had said, hey, we'll help you. But unlike the United States, Russia's not going to go in and do a forcible coup, impose its own outside rulers. It was like, if Syria is not going to take the steps to protect itself, we're not going to put ourselves there anyway, because the fact of the matter is Russia no longer needs Syria as a point for either its ships or planes. It's now got this north-south corridor that's running through Iran up through Azerbaijan and into Russia. So the strategic importance and relevance to Russia has diminished. So
Now,
this,
I wonder if you've heard anything. Another source that I have heard recently claimed that in the weeks, like several weeks before this happened, that apparently Russia had gotten wind of what the HTS was planning on doing through the Turks and whatever else, and apparently tried to convince Bashar al-Assad to make a deal with groups, and that he said, "No, I've got 70% of the country. They're on the weekend. I don't give anything to them." Do you know if that's accurate or not?
Yeah, I think that is accurate, and but at the same time, we saw let's not kid ourselves that this was some sort of recent effort by the CIA, the Brits, and Turkish intelligence to overturn Assad. This started 13 years ago, and actually probably before that. But it really intensified 13 years ago when we had the weapons that were coming out of Libya through Benghazi to Turkey. That was being handled by the CIA. Once it got delivered to Turkey, to the Turkish intelligence, it was then transferred. That the United States claimed it was supporting democratic forces in Syria, but the reality was the bulk of that aid was going to groups like al-Nusra, which had come out of ISIS, more radical than ISIS, if you can imagine that. And this guy Jilani, who's now heading the HTS, he was a senior guy in both ISIS and then al-Nusra. So this makeover that has been taken place, where you see, again, this was I'm sure it was a CIA manufactured media opportunity to bring in CNN to interview Jilani, but not just any CNN reporter. No, they had to bring in a chick, bring in the female, put on the headscarf, and you see, he wasn't trying to rape her or behead her, so he's a good guy. That was the message being said. Hey, he didn't pick her up and say, treat her like a slave. He talked to her respectfully. This was all stage managed to present, to clean this guy up, to try to pretend that he's something normal. He is, and I don't use this term loosely, he is a genuine bona fide terrorist. What is a terrorist? A terrorist is somebody who uses violence against civilians for political means. And the political means in this case is his desire to establish an Islamic state, an Islamic government, an Islamic society where everybody is forced to adhere to the rules of Islam as he and his cohorts interpret it.
Okay, so what is the play here for the United States? Because he still, as of this moment, still has a $10 million bounty on his head because of a lot of that past intransigence, et cetera, all those things that he had done. I mean, he was in an American prison for, I think I've heard, like 5 years or something after he fought against us in the Iraq insurgency. Then it was with al-Nusra, with ISIS periodically somehow. But now all of a sudden, as you say in this CNN interview, now he's a good guy. And now then we're going to welcome him into, that Biden basically said it was a good thing that Assad's gone. Well, he didn't even talk about who's coming in his place. So how is the U.S. going to reconcile having a bounty on this guy's head? And or are we going to pull it off and say, well, no, we watched CNN, so he's a good guy now?
No, they're trying to figure it out. Now, I know a lot of your listeners and viewers may think that I'm exaggerating or that I'm making this up. But I've seen this too many times. In the aftermath of our invasion of Iraq in 2003, I was busy teaching in a senior crisis management seminar, and I can show you the flags. I taught people from over 60 countries separately, each country separately. And all these countries, whether they were from Latin America, the Middle East or West Asia, they were from Asia, they were from Europe, and they're from Africa. And all of these foreigners kept asking, what's the U.S. plan? What's your real plan? What's going on in Iraq? And they didn't want to believe me that we hadn't thought it through. We were playing whack-a-mole. Whatever crisis, we'd hit it. There was no plan. There was no strategic plan of, okay, we're going to do this and it's going to produce this. And, we never thought through the prospect that we're going to depose a Ba'athist party. We're going to put in place a Shia controlled entity that has actually close relations with Iran, and that's going to strengthen Iran. We never thought that through. Ditto to this. They haven't thought this through. It's a whack-a-mole strategy. And so now they're trying to figure it out.
Let's don't forget Benghazi and Libya and taking out Muammar Gaddafi. I mean, remember what Hillary famously said, we came, we saw, we killed him, or however she phrased that. Like, yay, it's cool, we killed this guy. And what is the result to this day in Libya?
Well, and look at Afghanistan. So, I mean, the United States has at least a consistent track record of not thinking this stuff through. And I listen, I had I think I've mentioned before, one of my CIA colleagues and an old friend, he was put in charge of the Iran task force back in I think it was around 2006. And there was a lot of pressure being ginned up in the Bush administration at that time to go to war with Iran. And he's one of these guys who says, okay, we do this, then what comes next? And the answer he got was, oh, don't worry about it. It'll work out. And that was his sign to say, nope, I'm not sticking around here. I'm getting out. And he moved on to another. He took a cut in pay. He took basically a demotion because he understood nothing good was going to come of that. But that is unfortunately typical, not just of CIA, but of the military and of the White House when it comes to these matters. They're not thinking through the 3, 4, 5, 6 steps ahead about what do we do if.
Well, and I want to go down that path a little bit because I'm going to back up like 7 or 8 steps back a little bit here. There was a tweet that came out the other. I just found it this morning. Actually, I'm not sure what the date on it actually is, but it's a guy who's called Nation First by George Christensen. And he says here, I've captured the first 2 because it's really important. HTS, a rebranded Al-Qaeda front, took Damascus on December the 8th. This wasn't a grassroots revolution. It was years in the making, fueled by billions of US dollars under CIA programs like Operation Timber Sycamore. More on that in just a second. But then he says a leaked 2012 US intelligence memo admitted the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and AQI, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, are major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. They knew we were arming terrorists. And then you see this leaked document from, guess who, Jake Sullivan in 2012, who sends this note to the U.S. State Department and acknowledges AQ, Al-Qaeda, is on our side in Syria. So, yeah, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of situation. But what is our plan here? That we were going to be on Al-Qaeda's side to Iraq, and of course this disastrously just fell apart. But there doesn't appear to have been any plan for this. I mean, I think that perfectly illustrates your point.
Yeah, no, it is. The other element that's going on here is just a profound lack of understanding on the part of most U.S. officials and people in the intelligence outfits, that they don't understand the depth of religious belief. Most people in the United States they've moved away from religion. They tend to be more secular, and as they move away from religion, they forget and don't understand how certain beliefs about spirituality, about eternity, about God, that how I guess deeply ingrained in some people that is, it becomes part of them that they can't deny, and it guides everything that they do. Well, that's what we're looking at here with the people like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who came out of, consolidated with al-Nusra. Al-Nusra back in 2013 were the ones who actually did the sarin gas attack. It was a false flag staged to make it look like it was the government of Syria, and they came out of ISIS. The guy Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And recall that it was, I think it was like 2005, 2006, that Ayman Zawahiri, the number 2 guy to bin Laden. Bin Laden's older. He was older. He was sort of the scholarly type. He wrote a letter to Zarqawi because Zarqawi was in, this was, had been in Iraq, was attacking mosques of Shia Muslims, attacking and killing Shia Muslims. And he viewed Iran as a great threat. So understand that just because they're, quote, believe in Allah doesn't mean they're all brothers and sisters and all on the same sheet of music. They're not. And out of that, Zawahiri, bin Laden's number 2, was telling Zarqawi, the ISIS guy, chill it a little bit. Go easy on, we don't want to alienate all these Shia, at least not yet. We'll get to them eventually. Make them feel safe. Don't let the Americans divide us. So, there are these kinds of divisions. And then, as you've seen with an ISIS, they fragment. It is like hitting a ball of mercury. It spreads out, but the constituent elements of what make mercury are still there, even though they're in separate pieces. And that's what you've got with these various radical, extremist, Sunni Muslim groups. They have a vision for remaking the world and making everybody conform to it. Now, right now, this guy's saying all the right words. I'm surprised he didn't come out and say, you know what? My pronouns are they and them. And, but oh yeah, we believe in diversity. Yes. His idea of diversity is I'll let one of my wives wear a black covering as opposed to a white covering. Hey, that's diverse.
Hey, so along with some of the things you said, and by the way, Gary was able to dig up that interview, and I want to ask you something specific about what he had said afterwards. But first of all, for those who may have missed it, here is a portion of that interview.
You've gone through quite the transformation. Once an Al-Qaeda leader, your group has had affiliations with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS, and now you are projecting this image of a moderate leader and a moderate group. What is HTS right now?
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is one of the factions in the region, just like all the others. Now we're talking about a larger project. We're talking about building Syria. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is merely one detail of this dialogue, and it may dissolve at any time. It's not an end in itself, but a means to perform a task confronting this regime. Once that task is complete, it will transition to a state of governance, institutions, and so on.
So interestingly enough, first of all, he did not answer her question when she was talking about Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. He literally didn't even answer it. He just went on to, here's what we want to do. But subsequent to that, he also said that, at least it was reported that he said, that he is willing to acknowledge the existence of Israel. And so that seems to be one thing that some are suggesting. I don't have any personal knowledge that there has been collusion between Israel and the HTS along with Turkey. And that was one of the prerequisites that they had to say. But my question is how is that going to play with some of the more radical elements within Islam that don't want to recognize Israel?
Yeah, no, he's just saying what his CIA handlers told him he needs to say for right now, and saying it to just keep the money flowing, because they do need the money. They do need what the intelligence agencies are funneling to them. But you've already had, the same day that he was making a speech in the mosque, the other members in the mosque were standing up saying, "Hey, next stop Jerusalem." Okay,
I missed that part.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I've got a video. I'm gonna post it at sonar21.com later today. I can send you a copy of it.
Please do.
These guys, they don't change. This is not like streaking in college. Back when you and I were in 1973, streaking was a thing. Or like hula hoops. There's fads. People go through pet rocks. That's not these guys. This is not some some temporary fad that, hey man, let's be jihadists for a month. No, they deeply believe that they are in touch with God, that they've got the correct vision of what Allah wants, and that therefore they are the messenger of Allah to bring it to the world. And you got a choice. Convert or die, baby. They don't allow Oh, no, oh, you want to be undecided? Okay, cool with us. They've never done that. This guy, Jelani, has actually sawed the heads off of people. He doesn't talk about it theoretically. He's done it. He's actually beheaded people. So the West needs to stop with this delusional nonsense of trying to, put lipstick on this kind of pig and pretend that it's Marilyn Monroe.
So
It ain't.
do you think that something similar is going to happen here? What happened in Afghanistan after the Taliban retook control in 2021, in which case, one of the things that the West was always talking about why we can't leave, et cetera, was because, they would impose this significant version of Sharia law. They would do this to women, et cetera. And then in the initial stages, after they had taken control, they said, yeah, no, we're different than we were now. So women can do more stuff and et cetera. And then slowly all of that went back to now where it's almost like it was before.
No, believe it or not, the Taliban are not as extreme as these guys. The Taliban are more reasonable. You can at least bring the Taliban in for negotiations and talk to them, as the Russians have. Yes, the Taliban, they live according to some very strict guidelines, but they don't see their mission in life as to go out and impose a caliphate on the world. These guys do. These guys are, if you will, they're the Trotskyite version of Islam. Just as Trotsky's view was a global communist revolution, their view is of this global Islamic revolution according to the dictates of Sunni Islam and out of the Wahhabist theology.
Well, that's not really encouraging.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Going back again to your comment from Sonar 21 that this was a deal with multiple parties in. I wonder what you can tell us about your knowledgeable about the Israeli portion of this, because I want to show you a clip. I showed you Biden a minute ago, basically claiming credit for everything that had happened. Like this validates all of his policies over nearly 4 years of his term. Benjamin Netanyahu went a little bit further in claiming his credit.
This is a historic day in the history of the Middle East. The Assad regime is a central link to Iran's axis of evil. This regime has fallen. This is a direct result of the blows we inflicted on Iran and Hezbollah, the major supporters of the Assad regime. This created a chain reaction throughout the Middle East of all those who wanted to be freed from this regime of oppression and tyranny.
Now, there is no doubt that the blows that Israel hit against Hezbollah and Iran definitely did weaken them and weakened Assad's hand. But what is Israel's play? And to what extent, if you're aware, did Israel have any participation with HTS, and what is their next play?
I don't think they had any direct role with HTS. They certainly had direct involvement with Turkish intelligence. But let's not forget, Israel keeps making the same mistake over and over and over and has not learned a thing. They funded, right after Hamas was organized in 1987, who stepped in almost immediately to begin funding, assisting Hamas and to grow into the organization that it became. It was Mossad. It was Israel. It was top-down government policy. They funded, created. They didn't organize Hamas. Hamas was organized itself out of its own desire to push the Israelis out. But Israel got right in bed with them. Why? Because Israel thought that they could use them to weaken Fatah and PLO. And yeah, that worked for a while. Then all of a sudden they get October 7th and then they're hollering like, screaming like babies. Oh, they hit us. Dudes, you helped arm them. You helped equip them. Okay? When it's like if you've got a mean dog that you know is going to bite people and you keep it around and you don't get it trained properly and it bites you, whose fault is that? That's your fault. So they're doing the same damn thing right now with HTS. They think that they can finesse and smooth and control these guys. They can't. And I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't know if it'll be 5 years down the road. But these jihadists do not believe that Israel should be in control of Al-Aqsa Mosque. These jihadists do not believe that the Jews should be allowed to build the temple on the site of Al-Aqsa Mosque. They will remove the Jews from Israel if they get the chance. And, but Netanyahu, again, he's like the United States, playing whack-a-mole, not looking past, the next 6 months. As long as he gets the immediate gratification, screw it, we'll worry about that later.
Now, what we've seen so far is that, according to some of those images that Gary was just showing you with that headline in the video, was especially overnight, and actually for several nights now, Israel has been just devastating Syria and destroying arms depots there, allegedly most of their Navy while it was in port, all kinds of ammunition depots, armor itself, actually, in some of these other places, like they're trying to eviscerate whatever's left of the arsenal of Bashar al-Assad so that the new guys can't come in and use it, presumably, against them. So it has definitely set them back many, many, many years before they would be able to resurrect a lot of that. But in the meantime, their forces have advanced beyond the Golan Heights into Syria. And Netanyahu initially said, well, this is just a defensive measure so that we can ensure our border safety. But it's unclear how far. In fact, Gary showed us a headline earlier today that Israeli tanks got to within 15 kilometers or 15 miles rather of Damascus today. So the question is, how far are they going, and do you have any visibility on that?
Well, Israel has demonstrated one thing. It does not have a vast logistics capability. So, yeah, hey, man, it looks great on paper. Look at all the territory we're taking. Well, you've got to sustain those forces out in the field. You got to provide them with fuel. You got to provide them with food. You got to provide them with ammunition. So these lines of communication, as you know from your own experience, create it as you expand. Well, it would help if you had a large base of potential military personnel to call upon. Israel does not have that. Israel has already proven it's not capable of even fighting a two-front war. As it had to get the ceasefire declared with Hezbollah.
Well, yeah, and actually I wanted to ask you about that. It certainly looks, at least on paper, that Israel had some advanced knowledge that this was coming. It seems like they wanted to make sure they got the Hezbollah off the plate with a ceasefire so that they could handle this. Because if they were still fighting in southern Lebanon, they couldn't be making these advances. They just don't have that many troops simultaneous with Hamas in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it was coordinated. Again, the most likely channel of coordination was through the United States CIA with Mossad. And then, the liaison officers go out and talk to the respective military units. But I think the United States was the go-between between Turkish intelligence and Mossad. But, Mossad has also had a relationship with Turkish intelligence, MIT, in the past. So it would not be out of the ordinary for them to talk.
So what are we to make of the big splashy break in diplomatic relations that Turkey made, less than 2 months ago, when it seems like lots of coordination continued on after that time?
Yeah, it was just to bamboozle his own public, the average Turk, because the average Turk is outraged with what the Zionists are doing to the Palestinians, and they want it to stop. But Erdogan's playing Erdogan's game. He's been one of the greatest scoundrels of history, and he is continuing in that mode. This is, the people have made a lot of it. Boy, this really weakens Russia and really weakens Iran. And it's like, well, sort of, except neither Russia or Iran border Syria. So they're not going to have to worry about floods of refugees, about smuggling, about terrorism, about other unsavory characters. There's going to be a lot of instability. Those countries that are on the immediate borders of Syria, so we're looking at Turkey, at Iraq, at Jordan, at Lebanon, at Israel. This, this is not going to age well for them. This jubilation, because, we saw it in Iraq. Remember March 2003? Saddam's statues are down. Look, hey, we're sitting in Saddam's chair. We're in his palace. Hey! And George W. Bush, mission accomplished.
Right.
Okay. How'd that turn out?
About that age. Speaking
yeah.
of not aging
Yeah.
well,
So what will happen in Syria will be worse than what happened in Iraq.
that's quite a statement.
Yeah.
But so if that's where the story ended, it would only be bad. And we would be worried about what could happen with all these different actors here. But there are some of the United States that would like to take it one notch further and maybe escalate it to Iran. Here is General Jack Keane making just that pledge.
Iran. We have the opportunity now to neutralize this regime once and for all. Why? Just look at what happened. Hamas and Hezbollah are decimated. Their number one strategic client in the region, which was enabling them to dominate and control the region, is Syria. They just lost it. They are completely defenseless at home. They have a weak conventional military, and they have no air defense system to protect their strategic assets. What President Trump can do coming into power is issue an ultimatum along with the Prime Minister of Israel and the Arab nations to the Iranian leader and tell them, number one, you are going to dismantle your nuclear enterprise. You are going to stop providing assistance to your proxies. You are going to tell your proxies to stand down in the region. The alternative, maximum toughest sanctions that will bankrupt your country. Number two, surgical kinetic strikes to cripple your nuclear enterprise and to destroy the remaining rockets and missiles. He has to do that in conjunction with the Prime Minister. Okay, Can we do it diplomatically, or do we have to do it kinetically?
Okay, a lot to unpack there. But one of the things that jumps out at me first and gets my dander going is basically he thinks that the incoming Trump administration is the king, that he can just say, we're going to give an ultimatum to Iran, who, by the way, poses no threat to us. They've been severely weakened even from what they were. We do not need to go to war with them under any circumstances that currently exist. But secondly, what about Congress? I mean, he's talking about going to war, which has to be authorized by Congress first. Obviously, that's not even in his wheelhouse, his mentality at all. As it is with a whole bunch of other people in Washington, D.C. of either party, that Congress is more like a nuisance and something to be easily bypassed, and they'll just go straight to the president. So I want to talk about that part first. Is that troubling to you?
Well, I take issue with the concept that, number one, Iran's become weakened. And I think this, again, illustrates Jack Keane's profound ignorance.
I think that they have been weakened in the sense that they have now lost their connection to Hezbollah. Hezbollah itself has been severely weakened, and some of their lifeline
I think
they have been weakened.
Yeah, but the point about them being weakened is they've now got a military alliance with Russia that didn't exist 2 years ago.
Fair.
They do have a stronger military relationship with China that didn't exist years ago. They're now members of BRICS, which was not the case 2 years ago. So they now have economic alternatives that go outside and are not governed by the sanctions. They've reestablished relationships with Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And so instead of being, quote, weakened, and militarily, I tell you what's happening right now, I'd bet dollars to donuts on it. We're going to probably hear Khatami, I believe, is supposed to speak to the Iranian nation tomorrow. I think Iran's going to go ahead and build a nuke. I think they'll have a nuke ready to go within a month or two, because they've now recognized this effort to try to make nice with the West, this effort to try to talk to the West, to try to negotiate, because you correctly, you nailed it, Danny. They don't pose a threat to the United States. They've not carried out a single terrorist attack against U.S. civilians, in the last 30 years. And when you go to the State Department record of, they're the source of the country reports on terrorism. The top 10 terrorist groups, none of them have any relationship whatsoever to Iran. However, Hayat, Tahrir al-Sham, they're in the top 10 since 2017. Okay? And that we're dealing with a top 10 terrorist group pretending that Iran is this massive threat, and that if Iran just stops supporting Hamas will go away. No, it won't. This with the Palestinian people that are represented now by Hamas and are becoming more popular, not less, among the Palestinian people,
Yeah.
They're fighting for something. They're fighting for the land. They're fighting for the right to live. That's what the West doesn't get. We don't view them as human beings. We don't view them as people worthy of even life. And so that's why
Yeah.
I say this. The dynamic in this, if Trump foolishly falls for what Keen's purporting to push, I think they're in for a real surprise that Iran is much more militarily capable, and we're much less militarily capable than we imagine.
Yeah, and I think just on the surface of it, as has been demonstrated, if Iran were to unleash its full missile capacity, it would saturate, whatever from the Iron Dome and David Sling and all that in very short order, because I don't think they don't have as many interceptor missiles, I think, as Iran probably does missiles just by itself. But then, of course, they have control of the Strait of Hormuz. They could do all that if they needed to. But the bigger question that I have for you, in light of this whole BRICS situation here, if the United States and or Israel, and either or both together, were to try to make good on that and to try to decapitate the Iranian regime, what would happen? What do you think would be the reaction of China and Russia? I mean, the actual reaction.
I think we would see a nuclear war. Russia will defend Iran. Russia now recognizes, again, this is one of the lessons that comes out of Syria. Efforts to negotiate, efforts to have agreements that the West will honor. What they've learned is the West does not honor these agreements. We make these agreements and we either walk away from them, like with the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, we walk away from that, or the Minsk Agreement, we lie about that and betray it. And then the
or the JCPOA, you could add that into it as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, the West fails to appreciate that, particularly the Russians. They're pretty legalistic. They make these agreements and they actually expect everybody to abide by them. Man, we treat those agreements like toilet paper, and we've got desperate need for toilet paper.
So what do you think then is going to be the next stage here? Because especially as Trump's coming in. So one of the first things that actually I've been arguing this since 2019, even before that in writing, that we need to get our troops out of Syria because they do nothing but serve as a point of strategic vulnerability, both Iraq and in Syria. But it seems like the outgoing White House is wanting to say, hey, forget about that. Whether you go into attack Iran, whatever, y'all can do that. But whatever you do, don't let any of these troops go here because they are desperately needed for our national security, as Jake Sullivan said.
We have a presence both in Iraq and in Syria. That presence in Syria is there to work hand in hand with local partners to continue to suppress the threat that ISIS has posed going back many years now. And we've had significant progress in that fight just even in the last few months. Major players taken off the battlefield, large-scale degradation of those ISIS forces. But of course, an event like this happens, and ISIS immediately looks to take advantage. And we have seen reports of ISIS trying out in the Syrian Badia, the desert, to try to reconstitute to a certain extent. So we will continue.
That's enough of that, Gary. We can let that go. That's the gist of it there. And then yesterday, Sabrina Singh from the Pentagon actually adds to that and says that, this is what was the phrase she used, Gary? If you could roll that down. She said, CENTCOM, together with allies and partners in this region, will continue to carry out operations to degrade ISIS capabilities even during this dynamic period in Syria, she says. Now, I want to point that out. The reason why I asked Gary to highlight that part is the word degrade, because what that means is it has been in practice. It's an ill-defined term. It can mean anything you want, and it's also militarily unattainable. No one can ever say when they have been degraded or what criteria meets that definition so that you can say mission accomplished and leave. It means we will stay there forever. How do you see this playing out in the Trump administration?
Yeah, well, let's recognize Jelani, the head of HTS. He's an ISIS subsidiary. So, I think that the next 40 days are going to be pretty chaotic from the U.S. policy standpoint because the State Department is really in no position to make an established policy of how we're going to deal with Jelani. because either you've got to go through the process of removing him from the terrorist list and taking down the $10 million rewards that's on his head,
Right.
which, that's going to require some decision making out of diplomatic security. That's where that program's managed. So I don't see at this juncture that anybody at state, the tendency of these foreign service officers, nobody wants to really make a decision, because if you make a decision, might get blamed. And if you get blamed, boy, there goes your future career of possibly getting named ambassador somewhere. So the old saying, an action passed is an action taken. So they're going to be playing hot potato with this thing. Well, yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't you put it over here and see what they want to do? So that whole coordination process will go on until the Trump people show up. And then they're going to have that sandwich of bovine excrement to eat. And they're going to have to figure out, what condiments do we sprinkle on this? Because there's no way you're going to make it taste good. So
So now Trump tried to get our troops out of Syria before he left office, and was talked out of it by the foreign policy elite,
Esper and
Milley, among others. But now he's coming in this time, and those kind of people aren't there. Do you think that he'll make good on that? Because immediately he'll be attacked as, oh my gosh, you are surrendering to Iran, something like that. What do you think he'll do?
Yeah, no, I don't think he'll end up pulling them out. I think they'll stay there. They'll find some excuse, because what you're going to see is, I think the Turks are going to attack the Kurds. Some of that's already happening. So the war between Turkey and or Turkey, as they like to say, and the Kurds, that's going to intensify. And so the United States then sides with the Kurds, sort of, and we're going to be witnessing a massacre of the Kurds by the Turks, because you've got the PKK, which has been carrying out terrorist attacks against Turkey for, 40 years.
Yeah.
I was actually hired along with Ambassador Morris Busby back in 1995 to write an analysis of the PKK and its support by the government of Greece in carrying out terrorist attacks against the Turks. And there was ample evidence that. So this has been a long-standing problem, but Turkey, that's what Turkey wants. They would like to see a Syria in which all elements of Syria were under rule of one entity, and including the Kurds, so that the Kurds don't get their own independent country. The Kurds, however, are going to be pressing this moment for independence, and Jelani and ISIS and all those guys, they don't have the military reach right now to go out and impose any kind of order or force. The Kurds have an advantage. And so, like I said, this is going to be chaos. And so Trump's going to inherit this chaos. One way to help mitigate that would be to pull U.S. forces out and say, hey, this isn't our problem, just let them fight it out. But with Hegseth, if he makes it through, with Marco Rubio, with Waltz, those people are all inclined to, oh, no, we got to stay in there, because they'll see this in terms of we've got to help protect Israel. That's the lens that all of this is going to be looked at. There's no other interest.
What's ironic and if not outright perverse and angering to me is it doesn't do anything for Israel. Those 900 troops there are just dots on a map, and they spend most of their time in force protection, protecting themselves. They don't have combat power that they can use for Israel or anything else. There's nothing but vulnerability. That's what just drives me crazy.
Yeah, I think there is going to be a bit of a hiatus in events right now. Let Syria sort out. Russia's going to continue pressing forward and keep wrapping up territory in Ukraine. But all the other Arab governments in the region, they want to see what Trump's going to do. They got questions. They have beliefs and assumptions. Yeah, he might do this or he might do that, but they're not sure what he's going to do. And frankly, I'm not even sure Trump's sure what he's going to do, because the number of crises that are on his plate, and the one I mentioned, sent to you last night, about the fact that the Chinese have completely compromised U.S. encryption of all classified communications. It's been completely, utterly compromised. And now the government's scrambling. There's a briefing this afternoon for members of the House to sort of say, oh, Houston, we got a problem. So
yeah, why hasn't this been major news so far? Why isn't this on the lead of every newspaper?
Because people aren't being told about how bad it is. You know, I got a phone call from a buddy who's directly involved with it, and he was just briefed in on it yesterday. The government wide in the U.S. government were only briefed on it last week. The first word of it came out, I guess, about a month ago. Now that raises the question: how did we find out?
Yeah, that was my question.
Was there a walk-in? Was there an intercepted communication? Was there, what was the intelligence that we got that let us know that the Chinese were reading? They've been reading everything. People need to understand, on the government issue cell phones, there's a secure app. You hit this app, it's like Signal or Telegram, and every communication on there they thought was completely secure. So you could deal with all your top secret stuff on that. It's been compromised since at least 2022.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
I don't understand how that even could have happened.
Yeah. And well, how it happened was when the Department of Justice, the networks that the military is using are the telephone networks, the systems, the Verizon, the AT&T, the Sprint, all of those, T-Mobile. And so they use these commercial networks. But on using those commercial networks, they've included an app, a secure app. At least they thought it was secure, but DOJ insisted that there be a backdoor because they didn't want any of these networks to be used for communications that the FBI couldn't monitor. So all of these commercial networks left this back door in. Well, the Chinese found the back door, and they've been in it. So we did it to ourselves. This is the ultimate self-inflicted wound. So that's one of the other things. Trump's going to come into office and be faced with this massive security breach that has compromised not just military operations and activities, but CIA operations. Because I guarantee you, those same backdoors, the CIA officers that are using phones with that particular app, where they thought they could communicate and be secure, the Chinese have compromised that. And in compromising that, they've identified assets, CIA agents who are working for CIA officers, front companies, a whole host of things. And what's happened, I'm told, is right now DOD has put a freeze on issuing any further contracts. They're going to move everything en masse to Starlink. Elon Musk is going to make a ton of money out of this because they see Musk's Starshield as the only sort of secure network that's not penetrated or compromised like the telephone companies are.
Well, so let's look at this from a different perspective here, because if this comes out and it is made public in a broad way, I mean, it leads to the automatic question of, what are you going to do about it? If you find out that the Chinese government, if this is true, and if it's proven that the Chinese government penetrated all this stuff and now have all of our information, you can be sure that there's lots of already China hawky people who are going to be wanting to retaliate in retribution against China, which could really make a bad situation worse. Sure. How do you see that playing out?
Well, I mean, we're always looking for a justification to try to go to war with China. And that's one of the reasons China did this. You know, they're collecting intelligence so they know exactly what the hell we're up to. Or is that just cheap talk, or are we serious about going to war with them? And that's, however this breach was discovered, and now it's probably closed, it's shut down. I was told, my friend that was talking to me, he was dealing with one of his contractors who had flown to Europe for a NATO meeting. I guess it was a NATO targeting conference. And as soon as they got off the plane, these DISA employees showed up and confiscated all their phones. Oh, give me those. What? Because they now realize you can't have those phones out and you can't use them. So people will use this as further justification to try to go to war with China. And, the people in the United States need to wake up. we're not the military behemoth we think we are. And, we're going to discover that the hard way, I'm afraid. We're going to push. And if Trump goes through with some of the threats, you're going to, he'll preside over a major U.S. military defeat. And man, his enemies will relish, beating him over the head with that, because he'll be a loser. And Trump, with his ego, he doesn't like to be a loser.
He doesn't like to be a loser, but he also doesn't like to take on losing positions. So let's hope that he would see through that and not take us down a path that he, God willing, his advisors can tell him is not a winning play and we can't do it. Let's just hope that happens. But wow, that's a potential bomb dropping right there. We're certainly going to be paying a lot of attention to how that comes out here in the next few days or so, especially after this hearing, I suppose. But listen, really appreciate you coming on as always. And even if there's, difficult things on the horizon, it's better to know about them. Remind everybody to go to sonar21.com. Probably you can keep updating all this. We don't have to wait for another week for Larry to come back. He's got stuff coming up all the time. He's got parts up there right now on the Syria situation, and the Russia, Ukraine, all kinds of stuff on there. Go see sonar21.com. And we appreciate you guys joining with us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on your way out. Also, as a reminder, we are now on podcasting. And I know a lot of you don't get a chance to watch all the video, but you can listen on podcast, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Podcast Addict, anywhere you get your podcast, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, and you will find us waiting for you there. Thank you very much, and we will look forward to seeing you tomorrow on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.